Got a couple of little things to go over before the main topic, so let's just jump right in. First up is this clip of the almighty T1 mispicking Senna in their game versus DRX yesterday. Check it out.
우리가 세나를
세나?
세나인데 미드가 니코인가?
니코야 니코.
일단 세나.
느낌도 있는데
를
할 수 있어.
뭐야?
뭐야 박아버렸네?
이렇게 버렸네?
미안. 오케이 할까?
괜찮아?
항상 괜찮아 무조건 해야 돼.
파이팅.
민영이 형 세나 궁 한 30초? 한 번씩 말하면 좋아.
알았어.
갱플 궁 느낌으로.
확인할게.
까먹어가지고 자꾸.
I especially love Zeus's reaction followed by Guma's fighting to try and raise team morale after the mistake had happened. And the best part is they actually won this game. T1 really are the GOATs. Up next we have Rush pulling off one of the most clutch base race plays I've ever seen. Check it out. Alrighty, we're about to discuss probably one of the biggest rune nerfs that I've seen in a really long time and the effects it's about to have on the game. Coming in the next patch, 14.4, the rune Lethal Tempo is getting an absolute gut punch for melees, going from 9 to 13.5% attack speed per stack to 5 to 16% per stack, meaning it's getting almost halved early game but gaining what is essentially a placebo buff late game. No one can even feel the extra attack speed later when you're already 3 attack speed items deep, it's just the range. To this nerf, Froxon, league gameplay lead, had this to say: Lethal Tempo has been too heavily skewed towards early game power for melees for a bit too long. We're looking to reduce this power and then tune around it for affected champions. This one has been a long time coming and honestly, we should have done this a bit earlier, which he's definitely not wrong about. So there's a bit to unpack here. Firstly, it's kind of obvious that this nerf is focused towards Yasuo and Yone and the interaction Lethal Tempo has with their Q, granting a stack of Lethal Tempo on top of their auto attacks. This isn't so problematic on its own. Other champions can stack Lethal Tempo with auto attack resets, but because Yasuo and Yone abilities scale with attack speed, their Q cooldown, autos, and range just become ridiculous if they're able to stack it in lane. On top of that, their Q is Yasuo and Yone's main form of CC, meaning that while you're being Q and autoed repeatedly, granting them attack speed and therefore a shorter Q cooldown, they're on their way to tornadoing you to death down the lane. Specifically with Yone, that coupled with his E makes his lethal range very high, to the point that it's lane losing from one bad trade. Now this has been this way since Lethal Tempo got reworked, quickly becoming the brothers' staple rune. Absolutely nothing even compares, just due to the way it interacts with not only their auto attack speed, but their spell cooldown. We have seen this kind of Q cooldown tech with early Yasuos as well. I don't even think Yone was out at the time, but back in the day, Yasuo mid sometimes went Hail of Blades, granting a shorter Q cooldown within the Hail of Blades window. Well, that's kind of what Lethal Tempo is, but there's no window, it's just all the time. Oh, and one other thing that's kind of weird to me too, other stacking runes like Conqueror fall off all at once, whereas Lethal Tempo has a down ramp, meaning if it was fully stacked but the stacks expire, they wind down, giving them a window to regain those stacks. The gameplay pattern this rune promotes in its current state is pretty unhealthy even outside these champions though, as I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this video has been autoed to death, or at least chunked level 1, by a Lethal Tempo, Ghost, Trundle, Tryndamere, or Kayle. There's a lot of agency granted just by them taking the rune. So we know it's pretty strong, has been forever, but no one's really complaining too much about other Lethal Tempo users. Outside of the problem I just spoke of, it seems it's mostly a Yasuo and Yone problem. With this said, it's quite weird to me that Riot would subsequently gut other melee Lethal Tempo users when they could quite simply just remove or alter the Yasuo-Yone Q interaction with the rune. Either way, I am not a Yasuo-Yone expert, but I do happen to know one. I reached out to the Yone-Yasuo top lane pioneer Dzukill for his thoughts on the nerf. Normally, I can pack this kind of thing, but everything he says here is very valuable, so I'm just going to dictate it. Here's what he had to say. Quote, well, it's a super hard nerf. Lethal Tempo almost reduced by half early, and there's no real compensation. Lethal Tempo giving more attack speed later does not save the scaling of especially Yasuo. Tabby is insanely OP, Frozen Heart is OP, Randomwins is OP. Any champ who can buy these items, you just can't touch mid or late. From the Lethal Tempo change at level 18, you're getting 15% more attack speed at max stacks. Yone is Yone though. I'm somewhat convinced you can always make this champ work just because of how crazy his kit is, but these are obviously big nerfs and he still struggles from all these tank items being this OP. I don't hate nerfing Lethal Tempo / nerfing how Yasuo Yone interacts with your Q cooldown because it is really toxic design early game. But if you nerf their early, they need actual buffs late. Yasuo should not be this hard countered by tanks considering he has massive weaknesses versus CC CC already and mobility issues if there is no wave nearby. So what compensation buffs would I make? Maybe for Yasuo, you could look to buff armor Penny gets from his R, because at the moment it's complete shit. You could also buff their crit strike damage because it's only 157.5% right now without IE. Or you nerf tank items, but God forbid tanks are weak. So even Dzukill recognizes lethal tempo or the Q interaction needed to be nerfed, but with how strong armor is at the moment, the late game buff is very placebo. So I then asked what he's going to do after the nerf, if he'll go back to Conqueror or what his plan is. This is what he had to say. Conqueror doesn't solve scaling issues and is still weaker early, so I doubt it. Fleet is bad because it's hard to proc it on opponents, but heals nothing on minions. Maybe an option mid lane, but not top. Halo Blades is just bad. Top lane, you're still going lethal tempo, just have to realize you're a lot weaker in long trades / all-ins than before. In mid, you have more an option to play around your runes, since mid is more about short trades, but lethal tempo is still the best rune for skirmishes. So it seems, according to the guru, that the Q interaction is that strong that lethal tempo will still be the rune of choice, but this is a pretty drastic nerf and still begs the question of what will happen to other lethal tempo users, because Froxon himself said there will be compensation for those affected. But as always, I want to know what you guys think. Was the nerf too far, or was this a necessary one? Let me know in the comments below, and for more league news, be sure to subscribe. Bye!